The galaxy was old. Older than most species could truly understand. Empires had risen and fallen like waves upon a shore. Stars had been born, had burned bright, and had died in spectacular explosions that seeded new worlds with the elements of life. And through it all, the Galactic Concord had watched. Commander Viral Ton sat in her observation chair, aboard the Time's Eternal Witness asterisk, her 4 eyes scanning the data streams that flowed across her screens. She was Kethrani, a species known for their patience and their long memories. Her people had been part of the Concord for over 8,000 years. In that time, she had personally witnessed 47 extinction events. She remembered each one. The Concord had rules, ancient rules, sacred rules. The most important of these was simple: do not intervene. When a species faced death, whether from disease, war, or cosmic disaster, the galaxy watched in silence. This was not cruelty. This was wisdom. This was the natural order of things. The strong survived. The weak faded into dust. To interfere was to upset the balance of the universe itself. At least, that was what Viral had always believed. The signal came at the 4th hour of her shift. It was a Class 7 distress beacon, the highest level of emergency. The source was a small world in the outer rim called Aerith 4. Viral pulled up the file on the planet and its people. The Myrathans, a peaceful species. They had soft blue skin and large, gentle eyes. They were farmers and artists. They had no weapons, no warships, no defenses. They had joined the Concord only 300 years ago, eager to share their music and their crops with the wider galaxy. They were kind. They were innocent. They were about to die. A rogue neutron star had entered their system. It was a dead thing, a collapsed remnant of a much larger star, and it was pulling at their sun with terrible gravity. Within 6 cycles, their sun would become unstable. Within 7, it would explode. The Myrathans had no way to escape. They had no ships capable of carrying their population to safety. They had nothing but hope. And so they had sent out a signal. Viral listened to it. The message played in every known language, cycling through thousands of translations. The voice was that of an old Myrathan female, and there was fear in it, but also a desperate hope that made Viral's hearts ache. "Please," the voice said. "Anyone who can hear this. We are the people of Aerith 4. Our world is dying. Our sun is failing. We cannot save ourselves. We are 2 billion souls. We have children. We have elders. We have artists and dreamers, and those who have never done harm to anyone. Please, if there is kindness in this universe, send help. We will give anything. We will do anything. Please, we cannot save ourselves." The message repeated, again and again, a cry into the void. Viral closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and began to type her report. Extinction. Event 48. Species. Myrathan. Cause. Stellar instability. Estimated time to extinction. 7 cycles. Recommended action. Observation and documentation. She filed the report and sent it to Concord headquarters. Then she sat back in her chair and waited. Across the galaxy, thousands of species received the same signal. The Velthari Dominion, with their vast fleets and their ancient pride, heard the Myrathans beg for help. They did nothing. The Syndicate of Yorn, masters of technology and engineering, heard the desperate plea. They calculated the resources that would be required for a rescue, and decided it was not worth the cost. The Collective of Minds, a network of billions of linked consciousnesses, debated the philosophical implications of intervention for several hours. They concluded that death was a natural part of existence, and that the Myrathans should accept their fate with dignity. One by one, species across the galaxy heard the signal. One by one, they chose silence. This was the way of things. This had always been the way of things. For 12,000 years, the Concord had watched species die. They had documented the extinctions with careful precision. They had recorded the final moments of countless civilizations, They had built monuments to the dead and written songs about the tragedy of existence. But they had never helped. Viral thought about the Marathon children. She thought about their artists and their farmers and their dreamers. She thought about the old female whose voice had carried such desperate hope across the stars, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt shame. But shame was not enough to make her act. The rules were the rules. The wisdom of 12,000 years could not be wrong. Intervention led to chaos. Intervention upset the balance. Intervention was forbidden, so Virel sat in her chair and watched her screens and waited for the Marathons to die. She did not know that everything was about to change. Far across the galaxy, on a small blue world that the Concord had mostly ignored, the signal reached a species that had only been part of the galactic community for 200 years. They were young, they were foolish, they were emotional and irrational, and they made decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They were called humans, and when they heard the Marathons cry for help, they did not file a report. They did not calculate the cost. They did not debate the philosophy of intervention. They answered, in the cold silence of space, where trillions of beings had chosen to look away. One species looked toward the light. One species heard a stranger's cry and felt it in their bones. One species remembered what it was like to be small and afraid and alone. The humans were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. On the Times Eternal Witness *, Commander Viral Tan continued her observations, unaware that the universe was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. She did not know that somewhere in the dark, engines were powering up. She did not know that across human space, men and women were leaving their families and their homes to fly toward a dying world. She did not know that hope was on its way, but she would learn. They all would. Sergeant Amara Osei was 26 years old. She had grown up in a small village in Ghana, on Earth, where her grandmother had told her stories about helping neighbors and strangers alike. When someone cries for help, her grandmother had said, "You do not ask if they deserve it. You simply help." Amara had carried those words with her to space. She was working the night shift on the Times Prometheus *, Earth's largest orbital command station, when the Marathon signal came through. She listened to it 3 times. The voice of the old Marathon female made her think of her grandmother. The desperation in that voice made her think of every story she had ever heard about people in trouble. Amara did not file the signal for observation. She did not send it to a committee for review. She picked up her communicator and called High Admiral Chen directly. "Admiral," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You need to hear this." High Admiral Lin Chen was 63 years old. She had served in the United Earth Fleet for 40 years. She had seen war and peace, triumph and tragedy. She had learned many things in her long career, but the most important lesson was this: some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. She listened to the Marathon signal in silence. When it finished, she closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and began giving orders. Within 1 hour, the United Earth Emergency Fleet was mobilizing. This fleet was humanity's greatest secret. For 200 years, since humans had first joined the Galactic Concord, they had watched the galaxy's silence with growing horror. They had seen species cry for help and receive nothing. They had witnessed extinctions that could have been prevented. They had listened to the Concord's ancient wisdom and found it to be cruelty dressed in fancy words. So they had built something. 47 ships. Not warships, but rescue vessels. Massive transports capable of carrying millions of refugees. Engineering ships equipped with atmospheric processors and gravity stabilizers. Medical vessels with the most advanced technology humanity could create. All of them hidden. All of them waiting. All of them ready for the day when someone would cry for help and humanity would answer. That day had come. Across Earth and its colonies, men and women received the call. Pilots left their families with quick embraces and whispered promises to return. Engineers packed their tools and headed for the launch bays. Doctors and nurses gathered medical supplies and prepared for the worst. Thousands of humans, from every nation and every background, dropped what they were doing and answered the call, because someone needed help. And that was enough. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Times Defiance *. the flagship of the emergency fleet. Around her, officers worked with calm efficiency, preparing for the fastest deployment in human history. The coordinates were set. The engines were charging. In a few minutes, they would jump across the galaxy to save a species they had never met. "Admiral," said her communications officer, "we're receiving transmissions from several Concord vessels. They're asking what we're doing." Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell them we're answering a distress call. Tell them they can help, or they can stay out of our way. Those are the only options." The message went out. Across the galaxy, alien intelligence operatives intercepted it and grew increasingly worried. The humans were not behaving like any species they had ever seen. They were not debating. They were not calculating. They were acting with a speed and determination that seemed almost reckless. One Velthari analyst reported to his superiors with obvious confusion in his voice. "They keep using words we don't understand," he said. "They talk about duty and conscience, and something called doing the right thing. They seem to believe they have no choice but to help." "That's absurd," his superior replied. "Every species has a choice. They are simply choosing poorly." But the humans did not see it that way. On the bridge of the Times, Defiance *, Admiral Chen watched the stars blur as her fleet jumped into hyperspace. They were moving faster than any conquered ship could follow. They were using technology they had developed in secret. Technology that should have been impossible, according to the Concord's own scientists. But humans had never been good at accepting the word impossible. "Admiral," said her navigation officer, "we'll arrive at Irith 4 inches 16 hours. That gives us approximately 5 cycles before the star goes critical." Chen nodded. 5 cycles to evacuate 2 billion people. It's not enough time." "No, ma'am, it's not." "Then we'll have to make it enough." She turned to face her crew. They were young and old. Men and women. People from every corner of Earth and its colonies. They were afraid, she could see it in their eyes. But they were also determined. "Listen to me," Chen said. "In a few hours, we're going to do something that no one in this galaxy has done for 12,000 years. We're going to answer a cry for help. We're going to save people who have no one else to save them. Some of us might not come back. I won't lie to you about that. But I want you to remember why we're doing this." She pointed toward the viewport, toward the distant stars. "Out there, right now, there are 2 billion people waiting to die. They're scared. They're alone. They sent out a message asking if anyone in the universe cared enough to help them, and we're going to show them that the answer is yes. We're going to show them that they're not alone. We're going to show this whole damn galaxy what it means to be human." A cheer rose up from the crew. It was not loud or dramatic. It was a quiet sound. A determined sound. The sound of people who knew they might die, and had chosen to go anyway. Commander Viral Tan, still watching from her observation post, received a direct hail from the human fleet. She accepted the transmission with trembling hands. A human face appeared on her screen. It was Admiral Chen, her eyes hard, and her voice cold. "Observation fleet vessel," Chen said. "This is the UES Times Defiance *. We are en route to Irith 4. You can help us, or you can watch. But if you try to stop us, I promise you, you will regret it." The transmission ended. Viral sat in stunned silence. In 12,000 years, no one had ever answered a distress call. No one had ever defied the wisdom of the Concord. No one had ever looked at the natural order and said, "No," until now. The humans were coming. And everything was about to change. The Galactic Concord had not held an emergency session in 300 years. The last one had been called to discuss a minor border dispute between 2 small empires. It had lasted 6 hours and accomplished nothing of importance. This session was different. Representatives from every major power in the galaxy gathered in the Great Chamber. A massive structure built in the heart of a hollowed-out asteroid. Thousands of beings filled the room, their bodies of every shape and size. Their voices raised in confused and angry debate. High Counselor Dreven of the Velthari Dominion stood at the central podium. He was old, even by Velthari standards. and he had seen many strange things in his long life. But nothing had prepared him for this. "The humans have gone mad," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "They are flying toward Erith 4 with a fleet of rescue ships. They intend to evacuate the entire Mirathan population." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some were shocked, others were amused, a few were frightened. "That's impossible," said a representative from the Syndicate of Yorn. "The logistics alone would require resources beyond anything a young species like humanity could possess. They've only been part of the Concord for 200 years. They don't have the technology." "And yet," Drevin replied, "our intelligence reports suggest otherwise." He pressed a button, and images appeared on the screens around the chamber. Human ships, massive and powerful, moving through hyperspace at speeds that should have been impossible. Engineering equipment that the Concord's best scientists could not identify. Medical technology that seemed like magic. "How?" demanded another representative. "How do they have these things?" Drevin's face was grim. "Because while we spent 12,000 years watching species die, the humans spent their 200 years building. They built ships designed for rescue. They built technology designed to save lives. They built an entire fleet for the sole purpose of answering calls that no one else would answer." Silence fell over the chamber. It was the silence of beings who had just realized that they had made a terrible mistake. "We must stop them," said a voice from the back of the room. "This is a violation of Concord law. Intervention is forbidden." "With what?" Drevin asked. "Our observation ships are not armed. Our military fleets are scattered across the galaxy. By the time we could assemble a force to intercept them, the humans will have already arrived at Erith 4. He paused. "And even if we could stop them, should we? The humans are not attacking anyone. They are trying to save lives." "The law is the law," the voice insisted. "The natural order must be preserved." Drevin looked out at the assembled representatives. He saw beings who had spent their entire lives believing in rules that now seemed hollow. He saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. Something that might have been shame. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "the law is wrong." No one answered him. Far away, on the dying world of Erith 4, the Myrathans waited for death. Telemorn was a teacher. She had spent her whole life in a small village near the planet's northern ocean, teaching young Myrathans about art and music and the beauty of the universe. She had believed, with all her heart, that the universe was a good place. She had believed that if you were kind and gentle, the universe would be kind and gentle in return. Now she stood in the village square, surrounded by her students and their families, and watched the sky burn. The sun was wrong. It had turned a sickly orange color, and great flares of fire licked out from its surface. The ground shook with constant tremors. The air smelled of smoke and fear. They had heard about the emergency signal. They knew that a message had been sent to the stars, begging for help. But no one had come. No one had answered. The universe, it seemed, was not as kind as Tella had believed. She held a young child in her arms, a little girl named Sari who had lost her parents in the first wave of earthquakes. Sari was crying softly, her small blue hands clutching Tella's robes. "Are we going to die?" Sari asked. Tella wanted to lie. She wanted to tell the child that everything would be fine, that help was coming, that the universe would not let them perish. But she could not find the words. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But we are together, and that is something." Then she heard a sound. It was a low rumble, coming from above. She looked up, expecting to see another solar flare, another sign of their approaching doom. Instead, she saw something impossible. Ships, dozens of them, breaking through the burning atmosphere, their hulls glowing with heat, their engines roaring with power. They were not Mirathan ships. They were not conquered ships. They were something else entirely. One of the ships descended toward the village. It was huge, bigger than any building Tella had ever seen. As it landed, a door opened in its side, and figures began to emerge. They were strange creatures. They had only 2 eyes and 2 arms and skin in shades of brown and pink and black. They moved quickly, with purpose, carrying equipment and supplies, and they were calling out, their voices strange but somehow warm. Myrathan citizens, we are here to help. Please move toward the ships. Bring nothing but yourselves and your loved ones. We are here to take you to safety. Tella did not understand. No one came. No one ever came. The Concord had rules. Intervention was forbidden. One of the strange creatures approached her. It was a female, with dark skin and kind eyes. She knelt down so that she was at eye level with little Sari. "Hello," she said in broken Myrathan. "My name is Amara. I am human. We heard your signal. We came to help, but why?" Tella managed to ask. "We are strangers. We have nothing to offer you," Amara smiled. It was a sad smile, but also a determined one. "You asked for help," she said simply. That was enough. Tella felt tears running down her face. She had spent her whole life believing in the goodness of the universe. She had almost lost that belief in the darkness of these final days, but now, standing before her, was proof that kindness still existed. The humans had come. Against all logic, against all expectation, against the ancient rules of a galaxy that had forgotten how to care. They had come. "Thank you," Tella whispered. Amara reached out and took her hand. "Don't thank us yet. We still have a lot of work to do. Now please, bring your people to the ships. We're getting everyone out of here." Above them, more human ships descended through the burning sky. And for the first time in days, the Myrathans began to hope. The evacuation of Erith 4 was the largest rescue operation in galactic history. It was also the most dangerous. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Times Defiance Asterisk, watching reports flood in from across the dying planet. The sun was getting worse by the hour. Solar flares were hitting the atmosphere with increasing frequency. Earthquakes were tearing apart cities. Tsunamis were washing over coastal regions. And through it all, her people were working. "Transport 7 is full," reported her operations officer. 8,000 Marathans aboard. "They're heading for orbit now." "Good. What about the northern continent?" "Heavy damage from the last earthquake. The Times Mercy Times and the Times Hope Times are on the ground, but they're having trouble reaching the mountain villages. The roads are destroyed." Chen nodded grimly. "Tell them to use the aerial shuttles. We're not leaving anyone behind." "Admiral, the radiation levels are rising. Our engineers are already taking dangerous doses." "I know. Tell them to rotate shifts every 2 hours. And make sure the medical teams are ready." "I know. I know." This was the reality of the rescue. It was not clean or easy. It was chaos and terror and impossible choices. Every hour brought new disasters. Every hour brought new sacrifices. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was an engineer aboard the Times Prometheus Star Asterisk, one of the largest transport ships in the fleet. He had been working for 18 hours straight, keeping the ship's atmospheric processors running while thousands of Myrathans huddled in the cargo bays below. The radiation was killing him. He could feel it in his bones, a deep ache that grew worse with every passing minute. His dosimeter had stopped working hours ago, overloaded by the levels he had absorbed. The doctors said he had maybe a year to live, if he stopped now and got treatment. He did not stop. There was a malfunction in the primary cooling system. If it failed, the atmospheric processors would overheat. If the processors overheated, the Myrathans in the cargo bays would suffocate. 12,000 lives depended on Marcus keeping this machine running, so he kept working. "Hey," said a voice behind him. It was his friend, Specialist Yuki Tanaka. She looked as tired as he felt. "You need to rest. Let me take over." Marcus shook his head. "I've got it. You should check on Section C. I heard they were having problems with the water recyclers." "Marcus," Yuki's voice was soft. "I know about the radiation. I know what it's doing to you." He turned to look at her. They had served together for 5 years. They had been through training and missions and long nights talking about their dreams. She was his best friend. "Someone has to do it," he said. "Might as well be me." Yuki's eyes filled with tears. But she did not argue. She understood. They all understood. Some things were worth dying for. "I'll tell your family you were brave," she said. "Tell them I did the right thing. That's all that matters." She hugged him, quickly, and then she was gone. Marcus turned back to his work. The cooling system needed attention. 12,000 lives were counting on him. He kept working. Across the planet, stories like this played out again and again. Human pilots flew into collapsing atmosphere pockets to reach remote villages, knowing they might not fly out again. Human doctors worked around the clock, treating injuries and illnesses, while the ground shook beneath their feet. Human soldiers carried elderly Murathans on their backs through burning streets. They were afraid. They were exhausted. They were dying, but they did not stop. Commander Viral Tan watched from her observation post, and something inside her broke. For 12,000 years, she had followed the rules. She had watched species die, and told herself it was the natural order. She had believed that non-intervention was wisdom. Now she saw humans sacrificing their lives for strangers, and she understood that she had been wrong. The Concord's rules were not wisdom. They were cowardice. They were an excuse to do nothing while people suffered. She thought about the Myrethan children. She thought about the human engineers dying of radiation poisoning to save them. She thought about what it meant to be part of a civilization that chose to look away. Then she made a decision. "Communications," she said, her voice shaking. "Open a channel to the human flagship." Her crew stared at her in shock. This was against regulations. This was against everything they had been taught. "Commander?" said her communications officer uncertainly. "Do it." The channel opened. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen. "Human vessel," Viral said. "This is Commander Viral Tan of the Observation Fleet. I am offering our assistance." Chen's expression did not change. "You want to help?" "Yes." "Why?" Viral thought about the question. She thought about 12,000 years of silence. She thought about 47 extinctions she had witnessed. She thought about all the times she had done nothing. "Because I am tired of watching," she said. "Because you have shown me what courage looks like. Because it is the right thing to do." For a long moment, Chen said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Welcome aboard, Commander. We could use every ship we can get." Viral turned to her crew. "Set course for Erith 4. All hands, prepare for rescue operations." No one moved. "That is an order," Viral said. "We are going to help." Slowly, uncertainly, her crew began to comply. And as the time's eternal witness times turned toward the dying world, other Concord ships began to follow. One at first, then 3, then a dozen. The silence was breaking. By the time the evacuation was complete, over 30 Concord vessels had joined the rescue. They saved hundreds of thousands of lives that would have been lost without their help, but the cost was high. 12 human ships were destroyed by solar flares and atmospheric collapse. 3,217 humans died. Engineers and doctors and pilots and soldiers, all of them giving their lives for people they had never met. The last transport lifted off just moments before the sun went critical. Behind it, Erith 4 disappeared in a blinding flash of light, but its people survived. All 2.3 billion of them. And when the Concorde asked Admiral Chen why humans had sacrificed so much for strangers, she gave an answer that would echo through history. "Because they asked for help," she said. "What other reason could we possibly need?" 10 years had passed since the rescue of Erith 4. 10 years since the galaxy had watched in shock as humans flew into fire and death to save strangers. 10 years since everything had changed. Admiral Viral Tan stood at the podium in the Grand Hall of Unity, looking out at the largest gathering of species the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from every corner of known space had come to witness this moment. This day would be remembered for centuries. She was no longer a commander. She was no longer part of the observation fleet. That organization had been dissolved 5 years ago. Its ships and crews reassigned to something new, something better. Today was the founding ceremony of the Galactic Emergency Response Coalition. Viral looked at the symbol displayed behind her. It showed two hands reaching toward each other against a field of stars. One hand was human. The other was Myrathan. It represented the moment that had changed everything. For 12,000 years, Viral began, her voice carrying across the silent hall. The Galactic Concord followed a simple rule. Do not intervene. When a species faced death, we watched. When civilizations fell, we documented. We called this wisdom. We called this the natural order. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembled representatives. We were wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but no one disagreed. The events of 10 years ago had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization. The old certainties had crumbled like the dying sun of Erith IV. I remember the day I first heard the Myrathan distress signal, Viral continued. I remember listening to their plea for help. And I remember doing nothing. I filed a report. I prepared to observe another extinction. I told myself that this was how things had to be. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. Then the humans came. They did not debate. They did not calculate. They simply heard a cry for help and answered. They flew across the galaxy in ships they had built in secret. Ships designed not for war but for salvation. They gave their lives for people they had never met. And when we asked them why, they said something I will never forget. She quoted Admiral Chen's words, the words that had become humanity's legacy. Because they asked for help. What other reason could we possibly need? The humans taught us something that day. They taught us that the universe is cold and dark and dangerous. They taught us that civilizations will face extinction, that species will suffer, that terrible things will happen to innocent people. But they also taught us that we have a choice. We can watch and do nothing. Or we can help. Viral gestured to the human delegation seated in the front row. Admiral Chen was there. Older now. Her hair gray but her eyes still sharp. Beside her sat Sergeant Amara Osei, the young woman who had refused to ignore a distress signal. Behind them were representatives from Earth and its colonies. Humans who had volunteered for the new coalition. In the years since the rescue of Erith IV, much has changed. The Velthari Dominion has established the first interstellar medical corps, with ships and supplies positioned throughout the galaxy to respond to health emergencies. The Syndicate of Yorn has developed new technology for planetary evacuation. Technology that they have shared freely with all species. The Collective of Minds has created a network for early warning of cosmic disasters, so that no world will ever be caught unprepared again. These changes had not come easily. There had been resistance. There had been those who clung to the old ways, who insisted that intervention was wrong, that the natural order must be preserved. But their voices had grown quieter year by year, drowned out by the growing chorus of those who wanted something better. Today, Viral said, we take the final step. Today, we formally establish the Galactic Emergency Response Coalition. From this day forward, no distress signal will go unanswered. No species will face extinction alone. When someone cries for help, we will come. She paused, her eyes glistening with emotion. I have been asked to serve as the coalition's first director. I accepted this honor not because I am worthy of it, but because I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the years I spent watching. I want to be the one who answers the signal. I want to be the one who brings hope. The applause began slowly and then built into a roar. Representatives from hundreds of species rose to their feet, their voices joining in approval. The old galaxy, the silent galaxy, was being swept away. Far from the Grand Hall, on a thriving colony world called New Erith, the Myrathan people were building a new civilization. Tella Morn stood in the garden outside her school, watching her students play. Little Sari was among them. No longer little but a tall and graceful young woman. She was studying to become a pilot, she had told Tella. She wanted to join the coalition. She wanted to help people the way the humans had helped her. The garden was filled with flowers from a dozen different worlds. Human roses grew beside Myrathan star blossoms. Velthari crystal vines climbed the walls alongside Yornish moss. It was a garden of cooperation, of friendship, of hope. Tella thought about the day the humans had come. She thought about Amara, the kind woman who had knelt down to comfort a frightened child. She thought about the impossible gift she had been given. The Myrathans had learned a new word from the humans. It was a word that had no equivalent in their language. A word that described something they had never known before. Hope. It was such a simple word, such a small word, but it contained the entire universe. Back on Earth, in a small cemetery overlooking the ocean, there was a memorial to the humans who had died at Erith 4. 3,217 names were carved into the stone, along with a simple inscription. They heard a cry for help. They answered. People came from all over the galaxy to visit this place. Myrethans brought flowers and whispered prayers of gratitude. Velthari stood in respectful silence. Even species that had opposed the rescue came to pay their respects, humbled by the courage they witnessed. And sometimes, late at night, when the stars were bright and the waves were quiet, you could almost hear voices on the wind. The voices of those who had given everything so that others might live. The voices of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things simply because it was right. The galaxy had awakened. The silence had been broken. And across the stars, whenever an emergency signal rang out, it was never met with silence again. Because the humans had taught them all a lesson that would never be forgotten. The universe is cold, but we don't have to be.